tonight, starting at 7 and then at 8:30, the championship matches for $1 million at the Club World Cup. What do I know? At TST, maybe it's the same thing. TST over at WakeMed Soccer Park in Cary. Sebastian Salazar from ESPN will be on the call with your friend Hercules Gomez. The big boys coming in. I love it. How are you?
Oh, great. And so excited to be back in Cary. I love this event. I love this part of the country. I got some old college buddies here and some friends from kind of way back. So I really love coming to this neck of the woods this time of year. It's a blast.
All right. I'm going to get deeper into the matches tonight in a second, but real quick, when this event came here 2 years ago, we helped do some promotion, and I spent a lot of time out there. The weather was much better 2 years ago. It was cooler until it became hot at the end, at the beginning, but you could tell this event had legs. It is such a festival of the sport. It is so much fun. There's so much energy. I know you enjoyed it. I was watching last night, listened to the commentary last night as Concafa SC fell just short, which, hey, tough, them's the breaks. Pumas was very, very good last night. Have you gotten that about the event too, though?
Yeah, I think, for me, I'll be totally honest. When the event was first kind of presented to me, I was a little bit of a skeptic about it because there's so many kind of new tournaments, new formats coming out right now that feel like, people are trying to reinvent the wheel. And when I came down here the first year for the final, because I just came in for the last game, I realized that this might be that to some extent, but that was really well run. And it was a really good idea. And that, like you said, there were some legs to it. But for me, when I really noticed it take off was year 2, because that's when they started to get some of the big names, the former players. Nani came last year. Kun Agüero came for the first time. I know, we'll probably talk about him and the role he played with Concafa SC, but Pat McAfee bringing his show here on top of bringing his team here, I think, gave this tournament some eyeballs that it probably never would have got otherwise. And then you can see just from the amount of teams that have entered on both sides of the tournament, they go from 24 to 48. They go from 8 to 16 on the women's side. So there's a lot more interest. There's a lot more big name interest. And from a media perspective, now it's at a time of year that's kind of dead. You know this, and you got a sports radio show. This is not the time of year where there's a million things to talk about. It fits kind of nicely into the calendar in a way that it's like, oh, hey, this is a cool event with people doing stuff that, I'm not seeing them do anymore because maybe they're past it at the professional level. But I think the sky is the limit for this tournament, really, considering we're just in year 3.
I love it. By the way, next year when the Hurricanes are in the Stanley Cup Finals, my ability to go to some of these matches might be limited, but right now they weren't in the Stanley Cup Finals. And by the way, I got an opportunity to see Sergio Aguero put up a brace as they advanced I guess they went from the round of 16 to the Elite 8 or the Grade 8, whatever we call it. So I got to see Sergio Aguero score twice in their match. Nani made it to the finals last year. These teams take it seriously, Sebastian.
Oh, my goodness. I mean, just Nani himself. I mean, he's on the verge of a red card every game. Now, to be fair, I've never seen Nani play pickup, right? Maybe that's just how he is. In the professional game, he didn't really do that because you can't. You'll get tossed. But my goodness, every game with him, there's a scuffle. There were last year. Yeah. You remember the Sasha question, him going back and forth with question last year. He was getting into it in the game we were calling yesterday. So yeah, in the quarterfinal that I was watching, preparing for the semifinal, he was getting into it with the Concafa boys. So, just him alone, I think, is like the best example of a guy who, this guy's played in the biggest games in the world and the biggest tournaments in the world, and he's out here with really nothing to prove, and he's taking it as seriously as you could imagine anyone taking anything.
All right, so real quick, so I was going to do this at the end, but we're already here. No sense jumping around. Sebastian Salazar will have the final tonight on ESPNU, I believe. Bumpy pitch, men and women are playing in the women's final against the U.S. women, led by, among others, Carly Lloyd, Allie Krieger, Heather O'Reilly, our friend who lives and works locally. Also, Bumpy Pitch Men will be going up against Pumas. Pumas has, like, I think the darling of the tournament in terms of their is it fair to say the round striker? Can I call him that? Who's got 6 goals in this tournament, including 2 in the win over Conquefa?
Yeah, Jose Antonio Medina Alvarado. What a player. And one of those guys that, the body shape is not what you might expect from somebody that's so good. But you got to remember, some of these guys are still relatively young. Maybe they've been out of kind of being full-time professionals for a few years, and, that affects all of us, differently, I'm sure. But you can tell it wasn't that long ago that this guy was playing at a pretty decent level. Herc was kind of going through his resume yesterday, had a cup of coffee with Pumas, and then bounced around, I think, to Atlanta and maybe another team in the second division in Mexico. So, and you see a lot of guys like that end up playing in these tournaments.
Yeah.
But this guy has a knack for goal in that way of, like, you're watching the game. I'm calling the game. I'm supposed to be anticipating a goal. He's got his back to goal. I'm not really ready for a goal call. And somehow he kind of wriggles an angle out of it and tucks it in the corner, and you're like, wow,
yeah,
I'm above the game. I didn't see that. How did he figure that out in the game? And you saw it yesterday, and you notice his body size, but he moves well for a big fella. And it's not necessarily speed, but it's deceleration. It's the turns. It's the chops. And he's a handful. But I got to say this about this Pumas, the Alabama team. I have trouble switching there from Pumas to not saying Alabama, but just saying Alabama. They are impressive. They're the real deal. There's some guys here who clearly have played together a lot in the past. Mm-hmm. They've got a goalie who yesterday stood on his head. Hugo Gomez is just incredible. He's played some MASL, I think, with one of the teams out in California. But he was just so good. Had a game-winning assist. And they've got a good mix of, like, indoor players, kind of guys just out of college, and then actually some I think somewhat interesting names. If you like, American soccer, you kind of follow Liga MX, you know them, but they're good. And talking to the Conquefa SC coaches after the game, they were like, "Oh, that's a team to beat tomorrow in the final. They're good." They had a lot of respect for the Pumas team and just how kind of clinical and good they were at the strategy of this specific version of kind of 7v7.
Yeah, Sebastian Salazar will have the call for ESPN tonight. Tony Miola, who was, I guess, the head coach for Conquefa SC, he knows MLS and Liga MX as well as anybody. Let me ask you a quick question about the men's national team. I know there are a lot of people who are distraught over a 1-2 loss in a friendly to Turkey. Should they be upset about that?
I think the bigger concern is the general state of the national team. I think in a bubble you could say, look, the United States needs better competition. They got to play all these local, regional CONCACAF teams all the time that maybe isn't a challenge or enough of a new challenge to really grow. So it's good to have that experience, and if you lose, that's fine. I think what we should be focused on is the fact that the conversations from the coach around this team, the $6 million a year coach, by the way, are about wanting it more and trying harder and wanting to represent your national team, which I think, one, I don't really buy it. I think, tactics and functionality matters much more. I think guys want to represent their national team. Mm-hmm. But then the reality that there are some big names that aren't here. And so I think it's really hard for me to sit here and say, boy, this team is in trouble next year based on what they did against Turkey without, let's be honest, 6, 7, maybe 8 starters, including the guy, Christian Pulisic. So absent that, if they have those guys, maybe it's a different result against Turkey. Maybe I have a different feeling about this team 12 months out. But having just seen what happened in the CONCACAF Nations League and having seen that and having seen the rhetoric around this team, both coming from the players and coming from the coach that just, I don't know, they're not talking about real tangible ways to fix this. They're just talking about attitude. And that worries me. I don't know that you can flip an attitude switch. And so when this World Cup comes around, they'll be fine. They should get through the group. They'll be set up for success in that way. But they're going to be measured, and they should be measured on what they do in the knockout rounds. And if they don't make a deep run, and I think deep is quarterfinals and beyond, it'll be a big disappointment. Not a huge failure, not a catastrophe, not a, burn everything down, but a big missed opportunity. This is a home World Cup. You've hired a really expensive coach, and a year out, we don't really have a good feeling about this team. And there's nothing you can point to really in the last year, since the firing of the last coach at Copa America, which was a disaster at home, that says, you know what? We should be optimistic about 2026, and that's the greater concern than a 2-1 loss to Turkey with 8 starters.
Sebastian Salazar is joining us here. I'm not put off by the loss to Turkey. I wasn't even put off by no success in the previous set of friendlies, and I'm not that concerned. I think they should at least advance to the semifinals in Gold Cup, even without Anthony Robinson, one of the best left backs in the world, even without Sergiño Dest, who whether he's one of the best right backs in the world, I don't think they have a suitable replacement for Sergiño Dest, anybody who can get forward. No Pulisic, no Gio Reyna, who, we could debate all day long whether or not Reyna's good enough, consistently good enough to be impactful all the time, but they should be able to at least get to the semifinals of Gold Cup even without those personnel problems, no?
Yeah, for sure. If we're honest about kind of the strength of the region, there's not that many teams that should be better than a U.S. team missing significant pieces. However, I think once you get to the semifinals, you're probably, if you've taken care of business in the group, which the United States should, your quarterfinal matchups should be relatively easy. That's relatively manageable, let's say it that way. And then you get to the semis, and it could be a Mexico. Well, if they have their best team and you don't, they're probably the favorite. Canada with their best team, which they might not have, but with a good team against the U.S. without all these players, maybe Canada's a favorite. Maybe even Panama. Yeah. If they're playing well, if they have all their studs, because the last few times they've handled the United States, they've done so without some of their big pieces too. So there's probably 2, maybe 3 teams where you're at least a coin flip, if not an underdog against in that semifinal, considering the missing pieces. But that said, if they go out in a semi and they don't even make the final, in a home Gold Cup, I think from a media standpoint, from a narrative standpoint, that won't be a good look. That won't be a win for Mauricio Pochettino. No. I think if he'd had some success here in the run up, if he'd won Nations League, if he'd have beaten Turkey and Switzerland, and the team was looking good, and they get to the finals without a bunch of their studs and lose to Mexico, I think that might fly. But given how bad it's been off the jump, given what they're paying him, given the expectations, given the home World Cup, if you get bounced in the semis and you're playing a meaningless third-place game at the Gold Cup, that's not going to be a fun conversation on Football Americas and the other shows like it, 12 months out from a home World Cup.
You should follow Sebastian Salazar on Twitter at Sebi Salazar, FUT, from ESPN. He'll have the call tonight. Bumpy pitch women versus U.S. women. Bumpy pitch men. We should call them men if we're calling them women, against Pumas de Alabama. I appreciate your time, sir. I hope to do it again soon.
Absolutely, man. Love talking to you. Love being down at this tournament. Hopefully we'll do it again next year.